Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, November 17th, 2021. Today is Friday, November 5th, 2021, and we are in the book of Judges, chapter 20. To recap, in chapter 19, we started this story that we're going to be continuing tonight. And in chapter 19, we have a Levite that the implication was he was already a married man because he had a servant. He's fairly wealthy. He has donkeys, and he got a girlfriend on the side, one that he wasn't willing to claim as his wife. And she didn't like that arrangement. She went back home to Dad, and then he decided to go get her. And he went to Dad's house, and he got her, and father-in-law delayed things a while, and then they left late in the day. And he wasn't willing to stay in Jerusalem, it's because it's a foreign city, and so they pressed on. And Gibeah was the town they were near when the sun went down. And they came into the town square, and nobody took them in, and eventually an Ephraimite that lived there came in from his fields and took them in. And the men of Gibeah, though, then pounded on the door while they were eating supper and demanded that the Ephraimite hand his guest over so they could rape him. And, of course, this is very vile. And the Ephraimite tries to get some sort of compromise, and what they end up doing is they end up sending the young woman, the girlfriend, out to be raped all night. And they're so vile at raping her that she crawls to the doorstep of the house and dies. And when the Levite gets up in the morning to go out and go home, he finds her dead on the doorstep. And so he carries her home, cuts her up, and sends servants all through Israel with 12 pieces to the 12 tribes, and basically calls everybody to an assembly. Everybody's outraged. Let's face it, you'd be outraged too. I mean, that's a pretty gross way of assembling somebody. It's a pretty vile thing that happened. Nobody here is innocent at this point. The man's not innocent because he's got a girlfriend on the side. She's not innocent. The Gibeonites are heinous. The Ephraimite is the cleanest looking of the bunch, and he's the one that first offers that they can rape the women. And you know, that's pretty bad. So we're going to start in chapter 20 at what happens after these body pieces are passed around Israel. Chapter 20, verse 1. Then all the Israelites from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Gilead came out as one man and assembled before the Lord at Mizpah. The leaders of all the people of the tribes of Israel took their places in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 soldiers armed with swords. The Benjamites heard that the Israelites had gone up to Mizpah. Then the Israelites said, "Tell us how this awful thing happened." So they've assembled 400,000 armed men, plus leadership, plus probably servants and everything else. I mean, this is a huge number of people in Mizpah. And Mizpah was one of the places that they would assemble and worship God. And it was one of the early places where Israel assembled. It was where they had assembled after they came out of 40 years of wandering in the desert. They'd stayed there a while. So it was an assembly place. It's apparently a good place for a large group of people to assemble. I think this is also one of the indications that this happened fairly early in the period of the Judges. Um, the other piece of evidence that I say used to say that is at the end, there's not many Benjamites left, 600 men, and they end up with wives. If it had happened late in the process, the tribe of Benjamin would not have been as big as it is in Samuel's time, and when Saul becomes a leader, um, I mean, yeah, Saul becomes king. Um, they would have been the smallest tribe and not somebody that the tribes of Israel would have followed. But by that point in time, they'd become a mighty tribe, uh, and they were able to field a large army in and of themselves, plus the other tribes fielding large armies, equivalent of size. So they had regenerated their numbers from this devastation, this war that we're fixing to read about happened. And so it takes time. Um, yeah, if you have a open land and plenty of food and you're dedicated to having large families, you can multiply pretty fast. Human beings can do an amazing job of multiplying. Um, so, they could have recouped in just a few generations. But this can't put it late in the period of the Judges. It has to put it fairly early. And that they're still assembling at Mizpah instead of at Shiloh, where the tabernacle ends up, indicates that it's still fairly early after the time of Joshua. It's the last story in Judges, because I don't think the people who assembled it put all that together and knew it and figured it out. They probably lost some of that history. And they didn't know where to put it, and it's a horrific tale, and so they put it at the end. That helps you with the blue of when. So most of the people that live in the land are probably not people that knew Joshua or the leadership that knew him, but probably one or two generations later. So most of the people are horrified, and they're basically conducting a trial. Um, what are the facts? What happened? Let's hear it from the person involved. Verse 4. So the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, said, I and my concubine came to Gibeah in Benjamin to spend the night. During the night, the men of Gibeah came after me and surrounded the house, intending to kill me. They raped my concubine, and she died. I took my concubine, cut her into pieces, and sent one piece to each region of Israel's inheritance, because they committed this lewd and disgraceful act in Israel. Now all of you Israelites, speak up and give your verdict. We know he was not moral. He shades the truth here. Yes, the bare facts are there. They raped her to death, and they had been wanting to get him out of the house. He doesn't tell that they were wanting to rape him or have sex with him. He didn't admit to that. That should have been right there. He says they're trying to kill me. Nowhere in the story before this have we heard that. Now, he may have thought that if he got raped, he would die. And, well, apparently because they raped her to death, the real distinct possibility that they would have raped him to death. But that's not what we've known before now. So he's not telling the truth completely, honestly. He's shading it. He's making it seem worse than it really is. Um, it's pretty hard right now. Yeah, the truth would have been sufficient. I think the assembly would have been outraged if he'd told exactly the truth, including his um, own sin in the process. I think they would have done the same thing if he'd been truthful with them. He didn't need to shade it. He didn't need to inflame it. He could have toned it down and they would have still been outraged. And he doesn't. Of course, that's the character we've known him for right now already. Let's face it, a man that takes a woman on the side already is not very truthful. And so it doesn't shock us about his character. Proceeding on verse 8. All the people rose as one man, saying, "None of us will go home, no, not one of us will return to his house. But now this is what we'll do, Gibeah. We'll go up against it as the lot directs. We'll take 10 men out of every 100 for all the tribes of Israel, and 100 from 1,000, 1,000 from 10,000, to get provisions for the army. Then when the army arrives at Gibeah in Benjamin, it can give them that what they deserve for all this vileness done in Israel." So all the men of Israel got together and united as one man against the city. So they pronounce a judgment on Gibeah. They're going to go attack it. And they're outraged. They're going to start basically a civil war. They're just planning to take just Gibeah and not, anything else. They're going to go after those who are evil. And they recognize that Gibeah has been evil. Verse 12, the tribes of Israel sent men throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What about this awful crime that is committed among you? Now surrender those wicked men of Gibeah to us, that we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel." So, some leadership, cooler heads prevailed and said, when let's go to war, they said, let's send a delegation and say, hey, this vile thing happened. Y'all got a piece of the dead body too. Turn over the evildoers and we'll clean this evilness out of Israel. We'll commit justice and then, we can go on living. And that's a reasonable thing to do. Oh, the other thing I meant to mention, this thing about the numbers, 10 out of 100, 100 out of 1,000, 1,000 out of 10,000. They're going to raise an army, but they're also going to supply the army. 10% of the army is going to be getting provisions and keeping the army provided. So they're making preparations to do war, and that does take time. And they're sending people out to collect the provisions and bring them back. And in the meantime, leadership is trying to come to a diplomatic solution instead of having to attack a town. The smart thing, because if Benjamin goes, "Oh, that's horrible too. We're not going to allow that in our land. Let's go arrest them and hand them over to you." Then wars avoided and averted, and the men are punished, and we're done. That would have been, in one sense, the sensible thing to do. It would have been the moral thing to do. But unfortunately, they're a tribal society, and every tribe is for themselves, and nobody has a national unity. Beginning of chapter 19, it said, "And there was no king in the land." So there was no unity in the land. And middle of verse 13. But the Benjamites would not listen to their fellow Israelites. from their towns they came together at Gibeah to fight against the Israelites. At once the Benjamites mobilized 26,000 swordsmen from their towns, in addition to 700 chosen men from those living in Gibeah. Among all those soldiers, there were 700 chosen men who were left-handed, each of whom could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. So Benjamin says, "No, we're going to defend our people. Whatever they did, it doesn't matter. We're going to defend them." So they're defending this evil. And they get together and they're going to defend Gibeah, not going to let it be conquered. 26,000 swordsmen. Benjamin was pretty good size. We're going to find out later in the chapter, there were still people left at home defending the home turf. So this wasn't everybody they could have mustered. That was just the army that they could muster. And 26,000 men defending Gibeah. That was a pretty impressive army. And they could have, Gibeah was a walled city. And so they could have lasted quite a while. It's going to be a fight. It's going to be a tough fight. Battle line's been drawn. And the Benjamites are defending evil, defending, homosexuality. They're defending rape. They're defending murder. And it was an organized rape, an organized murder. This wasn't like it was an accidental or one person did it. No, this was a group of men that intentionally did it. And they wanted to rape the man, but they'll take his wife. No. They're defending some really heinous things. Verse 17. Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 swordsmen, all of them fighting men. The Israelites went up to Bethel and inquired of the Lord. They said, "Who of us will go first to fight against the Benjamites?" The Lord replied, "Judah will go first." So the men of Israel, 400,000 strong, that's the number of men that assembled at Mizpah, by the way. They've sent men out and they've got supplies and they've come back, and so they're preparing for war, but they do the right thing. They go up to the Lord and they inquire, and they ask God what should be done, who should lead the charge. And so Judah should lead the charge. Judah is the largest tribe. It is the tribe that God has going to repeatedly say is the one to lead things. But they also have led the charge into the promised land. And they hold the biggest piece of property that any of the tribes have. Now, it's not necessarily the best property as far as that goes. It's on the edge of the desert. It's good pasture land. It is also good for growing grain and other agricultural crops. Some of the edges, they have good areas that are good fruit orchard areas. Jericho and his date, good for dates. Some of their territory was good for pomegranates and figs and other things like that. So, they are the breadbasket of Israel. And they probably are the most prosperous, at least as far as food and number of people. But there's other parts of Israel that are more food productive and are also fairly wealthy. That is, more food productive per acre. Um, but Judah got to be the leader because he was the one that defended Joseph and didn't want to sell him into slavery and didn't want to kill him and wanted to send him back to dad. So Jacob, Israel, the father, promoted him to be the leader. And through the centuries, the tribe of Judah has become the leadership, and under King David will become permanently the government leadership of Israel, with the Aaronic priesthood being the spiritual leaders. And that's going to be the two pillars that hold up society. Um, under King David, he's going to conquer Jerusalem and then make it the capital and prepare to put the temple there. His son Solomon's going to put the temple there, and so Judah, who owned the territory, and the priesthood, which congregated at the temple, were going to be the pillars of society, and so it's going to be in Judah. But at this point in time, it's still not that clear that they're leadership. But God says they're the ones to go up first. Now, the thing is, Benjamin is the tribe just north of Judah. All the other tribes are north of Benjamin. So 10 tribes are north of Benjamin, 1 tribe south, and it's the tribe south of Benjamin that's supposed to lead the fight at Gibeah. So the Lord's telling them what to do, directing them. They're seeking God's guidance. That's the right thing to do. And he gives them direction. Verse 19. The next morning the Israelites got up and pitched camp near Gibeah. The men of Israel went out to fight the Benjamites and took up battle positions against them in Gibeah. The Benjamites came out of Gibeah and cut down 22,000 Israelites on the battlefield that day. But the men of Israel encouraged one another and again took up their positions where they had stationed themselves the first day. The Israelites went up and wept before the Lord until evening, and they inquired of the Lord. They said, "Shall we go up to battle against Benjamin, our brothers?" The Lord answered, "Go up against them." So, the first day of battle, 22,000 men of Israel died in battle. That's a serious loss. Let's face it, that's a little over 5%, 5.5% of the army that was there. That's a heavy loss for one day. They have a reason to go up and cry before the Lord and weep and inquire, should we be doing this? Is this what you really want us to do? And God tells them, yes, go do it. And so the next day, verse 24, then the Israelites drew up near to Benjamin the second day. This time, when the Benjamites came out from Gibeah to oppose them, they cut down another 18,000 Israelites, all of them armed with swords. Then the Israelites, all the people, went up to Bethel, and there they sat weeping before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord, and the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days, the Ark of the Covenant of God was there, with Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, ministering before it. They asked, "Shall we go up again to battle with Benjamin our brother or not?" The Lord responded, "Go, for tomorrow I will give them into your hands." So the second day of battle, they lose another 18,000 people. They've lost 10% of their army in 2 days of battle. For hand-to-hand combat, that's serious losses. Most armies, unless they were seeing the enemy destroyed like that, would be considering, how do we sue for peace? And they're doing the right thing. They're going to the Lord. And so they spend the next day fasting and offering sacrifices to God and inquiring of God and seeking His face um, you know, without having the command already given to them in Scripture, they were humbling themselves and praying and seeking God's face and seeing if they needed to turn from some sort of evil. What were they doing wrong? And, they were inquiring of the Lord. And then the Lord gives them the answer. Same answer he's given the two previous days. Go, and then this time he gives something that I will give them into your hands. Verse 29. Then Israel set an ambush around Gibeah. They went up against the Benjamites on the third day and took positions against Gibeah as they had done before. The Benjamites came out to meet them and were drawn away from the city. They began to inflict casualties on the Israelites as before, so that about 30 men fell in the open field and on the roads, one leading to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. While the Benjamites were saying, "We are defeating them as before," the Israelites were saying, "Let's retreat and draw them away from the city to the roads." All the men of Israel moved from their places and took up positions at Baal Tamar, and the Israelite ambush charged out of its place on the west of Gibeah. Then 10,000 of Israel's finest men made a frontal attack on Gibeah. The fighting was so heavy that the Benjamites did not realize how near disaster was. The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and on that day the Israelites struck down 25,100 Benjamites, all armed with swords. Then the Benjamites saw that they were beaten. Now, the Benjamites, remember, had 26,000 swordsmen. So 25,100 swordsmen died that day. Of the 26,000, they had 900 men left. They were just totally destroyed, basically. And those 900 men saw they were defeated. Okay. Israel has lost 40,000 men. Serious losses, more than Benjamin's loss, but Benjamin had a much smaller army. The ambush came up and captured Gibeah and then attacked them from the rear. And the Benjamites didn't realize they were so badly damaged in that battle until it's too late. They couldn't retreat. They couldn't. They just had to stay, and they were getting slaughtered. And the Lord gave them into the hands of Israel, who defeated them completely, essentially. Pretty serious. Middle of verse 36. Now the men of Israel had given way before Benjamin because they relied on the ambush they had set near Gibeah. The men who had been in ambush made a sudden dash into Gibeah, spread out and put the whole city to the sword. The men of Israel had arranged with the ambush that they should send up a great cloud of smoke from the city, and when the men of Israel would turn in battle. The Benjamites had begun to inflict casualties on the men of Israel, about 30, and they said, "We are defeating them, as we did in the first battle." But when the column of smoke began to rise from the city, the Benjamites turned and saw the smoke from the whole city going up to the sky. Then the men of Israel turned on them, and the men of Benjamin were terrified because they realized that disaster had come upon them. So they fled before the Israelites in the direction of the desert, but they could not escape the battle. And the men of Israel who came out of the towns cut them down there. They surrounded the Benjamites, chased them, and easily overran them in the vicinity of Gibeah on the east. 18,000 Benjamites fell, all of them valiant warriors. As they turned and fled toward the desert to the rock of Rimmon, the Israelites cut down 5,000 men along the roads. They kept pressing after the Benjamites as far as Gidom and struck down 2,000 more. On that day, 25,000 Benjamite swordsmen fell, all of them valiant warriors. But 600 men turned and fled into the desert to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed 4 months. I'm going to stop right there. The second part of this passage deals with the details of the battle a little bit more, where each group died. We know that 600 men escaped. If you do the math, there's about 300 men not accounted for, and apparently that was the number killed on the first 2 days of battle from Benjamin. So they were doing a good job of winning the battle the first 2 days, and on the third day, because the Israelites changed tactics to an ambush, and let's face it, hand-to-hand combat, morale and psychology matter a great deal. They thought they were winning, and then the ambush came and killed Gibeah and burned it. And when they saw the smoke, they realized, oh wait, Gibeah's destroyed. Then they became disheartened and just ran, tried to run for their life. And the army turned back against them and started killing them. And the people from the surrounding areas came out of town and wouldn't let the Benjamites run away. And only about 600 made it out of the area and went out to the desert, to the rock of Rimmon, and stayed there. And they managed to escape, 600 men. Everybody else died of the army of Benjamin. And we get details about, how many died in this place and that place and the other place. And, it works up to the number that were recorded in the previous passage. It was a serious battle. It was also a serious blow to Israel. They apparently lost 30 more men, insignificant number for a battle. But they also lost essentially a tribe of Israel that day. Because 600 men is not a tribe. It's a small band. And but the men of Israel were not through, because they had sworn to wipe this evil out of the Israel. Verse 47, but 48, excuse me. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to the sword, including the animals and everything they found. All the towns they came across, they set on fire. So they go on a rampage, basically, slaughtering everybody that's left. Not just the army, not just the leadership. Men, women, children, and animals. I mean, they didn't leave anything alive. They burned all the cities. This is what they did to their own people. Well, okay, they were picturing it as, this is another tribe. This tells you how tribal Israel was at that time. They had no national unity. They, in one sense, didn't mind wiping out a tribe. They were maybe more moral because they did consult with God and they were concerned with God's answer and they weren't concerned with morality. But they didn't have any idea of a unity as a country. They were 11 tribes fighting another tribe. Okay, they did some great battle tactics. If they'd been doing this against people who didn't worship God, uh, that would have been exactly what God had been telling them to do. But they were doing it against people who nominally worship God. Admittedly, those people were defending something indefensible, but they didn't have to go in and kill all the Benjamites that were left that weren't in the army. That's violent evil too. Now, admittingly, the people of Gibeah, yeah, that was, I mean, apparently that place was just full of evil, and so evil that you couldn't count on anybody there being righteous. Wiping it out, and particularly during the battle, made sense. That was what Moses had commanded. If there is a tribe in a town in Israel that is evil, and when you investigate and find out it is, and that's what they did, they investigated, and yes, it was evil, then you go wipe it out, and you wipe it totally out. But he didn't say you go wipe out every other person in that same tribe, even if they defend that town. So they're taking vengeance, um, not doing what God said. Now, God did tell them to wipe out, to go up against Benjamin and defeat Gibeah, and that meant defeating the Benjamite army. But what they should have done is when they defeated the army and destroyed Gibeah, then, weep before the Lord that they had to destroy that many men and call the 600 men back and get them to repent of the evil that Gibeah had done, and then send them back home to the rest of the tribe, and not just kill all their wives and children and livestock and everything. That was not called for. But that's what they did. And so they didn't just kill the army. They treated them like godless foreigners and wiped out everything. Admittedly, that's what they'd been used to doing. But that wasn't what God told them to do. Almighty God, you hate evil. You want it wiped out. And at points in time, you do use armies to wipe it out. But Lord, when that happens, Lord, have us to not be vengeful. Have us when we've won to stop and be restorative and bring back and try to let holiness reign. Lord, have us to be people that even when we oppose evil, we accept repentance from those who are fallen, and we accept that they can turn back to you. And when evil has been defeated, help us to reach out then and help them, to build them up and build them up in you, so that they could honor you with their lives and with their substance and with who they are. Help us to be people who stay within your word and not go outside of it to try to do your will. this was a great insult to you and to your people, that they would even consider wiping out a tribe of Israel. And Lord, have us be the kind of people that would honor you and not go overboard. In your gracious name, Lord. Amen. And I hope to see you on Wednesday night. If not, I want to see you on Sunday. And if not, we'll meet back here on video. Have a blessed week.